It was Valvoline that coined the term oils ain't oils. We can say the same thing about synthetics. There are synthetics and there are synthetics, and the definition has been a bit fluid over time. So, to understand a little bit better, let's go back in time and let's consider what the landscape was like in the 1990s. So, in the 1990s, things were a little bit more simple. If you had a mineral oil, it originated from the ground. It was a crude oil, and it made up Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3. Synthetics were molecules which, were chemically manufactured. So we had things like the PAOs, the PAGs, the esters, and the alkylated naphthalenes. Now, geniuses in the marketing department, I think it was actually at Castrol with their Syntec product, decided that they wanted to market this particular product in a very specific way. So they actually ran TV advertisements. Remember TVs? They existed back in the 90s. And so on the TVs, they would advertise. The specific language that they used was unique molecular bonding and superior protection to all other motor oils. Now, on the face of that, the claim that it offers superior protection to other motor oils is that's a difficult bar to clear. The reason for this is if you look at the landscape, let's say, of PCMO, that is passenger car motor oils, they have this kind of unique scrutiny that other lubricant categories don't have. And that's because they exist in this unique segment where they are a consumer grade. Most other, let's say, for example, industrial lubricants and greases are sold to commercial entities that don't need the same level of protection that individual consumers do. So there's a lot more regulation and there's a lot more government intervention when it comes to engine oils, specifically light-duty engine oils. So, right, the language that you use in marketing materials, marketing collateral, and in advertisements needs to be accurate. And so the claim, when you make a claim, let's say superior protection to all other motor oils, there is an expectation that you have data to back that up. Maybe it's lab bench testing, maybe it is testing in simulated conditions, maybe it's real-world performance trials, but there needs to be some evidence to back up the claim. So Mobil in particular were very unhappy about this. The term would be grumpy cat, because they in particular were championing, the definition of synthetics in particular as being PAO, that's polyalpha olefins, right? So they contended, look, the Syntec product isn't PAO anymore, and they felt like the words in the Castrol ads were leading people to believe it was a PAO formulation. They contended actually the formulation has gotten worse since it switched from being a PAO to a Group 3, and you can't make the claim that it's superior to everything else because we believe that evidence is unsubstantiated. So this went to court, and there were arguments that were presented on both sides, which, to be honest, I have a lot of empathy for both sides of the argument. So Castrol contended synthetic oils are made from some product and they are transformed into another product. And if the final product is unrecognizable from its raw feedstock, then you should consider that to be a synthetic. So they're basically saying it doesn't matter where the molecules originate from. If they come out of the ground as crude oil, that doesn't matter. If we transform it sufficiently into an entirely different product category, then we should be able to claim it synthetic. And the analogy that I would draw is, a very simple one to draw is in the timber industry, right? So we have timber in the form of cut down trees, right, that are shaped into, let's say, giant boards, right? That is what we would call a natural product. But if you take timber and reduce it down to sawdust, and then you combine it with resins and things like that, and then you form new timber products out of that, you could argue that that is a synthetic timber, because that timber that you're selling on the open market no longer, represents a tree, right? It's a synthetic product. Now, Castrol actually had some pretty heavy hitters that they were able to call to the witness stand. Notably, some, at the time, recent Nobel chemistry prize winners. So, a decent amount of credibility there. Mobil's argument was, hold up, synthetics, the definition of synthetic has always been something which is formulated from very small molecules, we subject that to a chemical reaction, and then we build larger molecules, and they do not originate from crude oils. That is to say, things that fall into the category of group 4, that is polyalpha olefin technology, and some of the group 5s, for example, diesters and polyol esters, alkylated naphthalenes and things of the like, they are synthetics. On their side of the argument, they had the EPA, which had documentation to suggest that this was their definition. They also had evidence from Exxon. Now, you got to remember that Exxon and Mobil were not a single company at that time. It was pre-merger. And funnily enough, they actually presented information from Castrol's own website, which had similar verbiage. Of course, this being the 1990s, how good was that website? That's debatable, right? Ultimately, the judge or the jury, I'm not sure what kind of trial it was, but it favored Castrol. And with basically, just like Jesus turning water into wine, then they took the Castrol Syntec product and they gave it the blessing, and it was now considered a full synthetic, being made of a Group 3 formulation. All right. Now that's led to a plethora of terms in the industry. So we have terms like semi-synthetic, synthetic technology, synthetic fortified. These don't really have kind of like a formal meaning. Effectively, Group 3s, which are sufficiently hydrocracked, can be considered full synthetics, along with the Group 4s and some of the Group 5s. And then, if you include some amount of synthetic in your formulation, then you can use any of the above definitions. And a lot of companies have their own internal definitions of what they consider a semi-synthetic versus a full synthetic. So that means that most of the what we would call synthetics, whether they're semi-synthetic or not, usually are a mixture of Group 2 and 3, or possibly 3 and 4, or 4 and 5. Right? There's a bit of a mix there. So when you hear the term synthetic, it's kind of a much broader umbrella now. Now the drive has been towards less polyalpha olefin engine oils and more Group 2, Group 3 formulations. And the reason for this is because if you can now market Group 3 as full synthetic, then what is the incentive to make engine oils from PAO, right? You're basically going through extra manufacturing expense, and you don't get the benefit of it in the marketing. So the vast majority of consumer engine oils on the market now are probably a combination of Group 2 and Group 3, with a splash of Group 1 sometimes, which is kind of used almost like an additive these days. There is a bit of a changing landscape in terms of base oils as well, because what we've seen in recent years is the entry of GTL products. Now, without getting too much into the detail, the idea was, well, what if we can take natural gas, which is plentiful, abundant, and relatively cheap, and what if we can put it through a reaction to make synthetic-like molecules? So this is a formation of the Fischer-Tropsch process, and it means that you can actually use natural gas, turn it into, let's say, larger molecules, and you can get all kinds of different products from that, whether it's wax, if you just keep it as a paraffin, if you isomerize it, you can get things like naphtha, diesel, as well as lube oil fractions. This is really a product that has been most heavily marketed by Shell, right? They have a GTL plant in Qatar, which makes the vast majority of the world's GTL supply. But where that fits in the base oil strategy is that there's now kind of an intermediate group. It's not an official API group, but it's called, sometimes referred to or marketed as Group 3+, right? So it's not a polyalpha olefin. It's not technically a Group 3 because it doesn't start as crude oil, but the performance-wise, it sort of sits in between a Group 3 and a Group 4. And it can be manufactured at reasonably large scale, relatively inexpensively. The reason why we probably don't see it as much and why there aren't as many players is because it's a huge upfront investment to build a GTL plant. We're talking on the same scale as, let's say, an LNG facility. So it's multi-billion dollars that need to be invested, and the volumes compared to just selling gas on the open market is not really comparable. So for the foreseeable future, it's most likely that Shell will be the main ones marketing that product. However, they do sell the GTL product to other manufacturers. So you may see GTL being part of the formulation for many, many different types of engine oils.